Hello and welcome to the Career Success Podcast. I'm Jason Connolly. If you're a regular listener, it's great to have you back. But if you're new, welcome to the show. In this series every week, we speak to the biggest names in business all across the globe. We talk about their career stories, the lessons learned, how they've overcome challenges, and what success habits they practice. Practical advice to help you in your career. If you have a passion for business, then this is the podcast for you. In this episode, I'm delighted to be joined by Simon Thompson from Los Angeles. Having started his career as a hard news broadcast journalist in radio, Simon Thompson is a Los Angeles-based producer and journalist with 25 years' experience in the industry. Simon has produced and directed both short and long-form content for some of the biggest entertainment brands in the world, both domestically and internationally. Simon currently covers the entertainment industry for Forbes and Variety. He has produced upcoming programming for NBCUniversal, and the last year he wrote and produced a daily movie and TV show for Quibi. Simon worked at Reuters for several years covering entertainment and the award seasons, including the Oscars. He has also created content for brands including Netflix, IMAX, Dolby and studios, including Paramount Pictures, Warner Brothers and Disney. In his native UK, Simon launched London Live. He produced a daily 30 minutes live arts and entertainment show, which proved to be the channel's highest rated piece of editorial programming. He developed, produced and scripted highly successful Inside Hollywood show for Channel 5 and produced for ITN Productions and Good Morning Britain. Simon has written content for a range of newspapers including The Sun, The Independent, The London Evening Standard and several magazines. Simon continues to appear on the TV and radio worldwide, including Sky News and the BBC, to discuss significant events in the entertainment industry. He has also produced some of the biggest names in the industry, from Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson to Oprah Winfrey. Simon is also currently developing a series of documentaries, and the first one is due to go into production this year. Simon lives in Los Angeles with his wife and his dog. Simon, thank you for joining me on this episode.
I'm so sorry that took up so much of your time.
I enjoyed it. I was getting really into it the further along down I got. So we have got so much to talk about. I could barely even get the introduction in.
Well, it's funny because you I think with a lot of people, people often say to
Sure.
me, they consider me to be successful, and I'm very pleased when people do that. But
It sounds like you are very successful by the introduction, Simon.
but people ask me how I do it, and I'll be honest with you, I don't know. I've been in the industry for 25 years. I'm not going to pretend for 1 second that my career has gone the way that I thought it would have gone. But I'm very pleased and very excited about
Hmm.
where it is and where it's going. Certainly, when I started out, a lot of people were kind of like, "What is your 5-year plan? What is your 10-year plan?" And I think,
Hmm.
it's almost impossible to predict that in this day and age because everything is evolving so quickly for just a professional requirement or a change in technology or the change that things are done, whether that's business or legislation or other things. It's almost impossible to predict now, where your career will go. I surpassed what I thought was going to be the nadir of my career, which was reading the news on national radio in the UK almost
Hmm.
20 years ago now. I achieved that. And I genuinely sat down one day and was like, what the hell am I going to do now? Because I was in my mid-20s and I'm like, well,
I've had many moments like that as well.
yeah, and you're like, genuinely, what do I want to do? Where can I go?
Hmm.
So at that point, while I still care deeply about what I do and how I do it, I very much have like a suck it and see attitude. It's like, I mean,
Oh.
I achieved everything that I wanted to at that point that I thought was going to be as far as I would go. Everything else is an exciting and exploratory bonus.
Then tell us how it all kind of got started for you then to even get into, because it's not easy to get into the media. It's extremely difficult even to get that kind of first run on the ladder. But it sounds like when your career started and started picking up pace, it sounded like you were running at points.
Oh God, trust me. I mean, I'll take you back to the very beginning, but I mean,
Sure.
it's always been hard to get into the industry. But I think it's exceptionally hard for people now because unfortunately there is a huge economy where so much content is is created for free. There are so many people. Certainly, looking at the entertainment sector, the majority of people now aren't getting any money or they're low or no pay workers to create content because of the
Yeah.
growth of the whole
Uh,
blogosphere. And so it's actually very hard to not only get into the industry, You can create a blog, that's great, but it's kind of like shouting into a cave. Just because you create a blog, it doesn't mean that anyone's going to read it. And it certainly doesn't mean that you're going to make any money off it. It's increasingly harder to sustain a career, let alone get it off the ground. But I started when it was in the 90s, and I went through school, I went through college, and I decided that I wanted to do radio. And I always fancied myself as a radio presenter. I always loved doing that. I did hospital radio as a teenager, and it was great fun. And then I got offered the opportunity when I was at Swansea College, which is where I studied. And the local radio station, Swansea Sound, which is one of the oldest, it's sadly, become a different brand in the last couple of years because of the change in media ownership. But it was one of the original independent radio stations in the UK. And I got the opportunity to work in the newsroom as a work experience boy. So I did my time there, and I kind of realized that I was interested in, it still allowed me to be on air. And I was kind of more interested in the news. So I started to play around with that. And after I did my work experience, I got invited back. So this was mid 90s, and I got paid the grand total of £50 a week to come and work in the newsroom, which even in that day and age really was not a huge amount of money. And so I started working in the newsroom 5 days a week. I'd do my 8-hour shifts. And then one day, my boss, who is no longer with us, let's just describe him as a character. He came back from the pub one day. Everybody in those days went to the pub for lunch and, had their liquid lunches.
That's a distant memory.
Yeah, I mean, those are the days that they were. And he came back.
Oh,
He was,
I'm reminiscing.
well,
Go on.
he was so drunk he fell through his chair, and he had to get taken to hospital to get checked out. And I was the only person in the newsroom.
Oh,
So I was left as a 17-year-old boy in the newsroom. I'd never delivered a full news show before, and I had to create from scratch a 30-minute live news show. And I did, and it was shit. I didn't have enough content for the show. It was all in the wrong order. I went into it completely blind, but I did it. And after that, I decided that actually, if I really wanted to take this seriously, then I needed to learn these disciplines, because that probably might happen again, or there'd be another situation where I needed to do it. And so I spent my time now on my very first job kind of learning how to organize a newsroom, learning about editorial, learning about sound bites, learning to get the most information possible into a small amount of time. And another key thing I learned was how to make people who have no interest in what I'm talking about interested in what I'm talking about. That's really a key part of getting any information. And I think any successful business.
How do you know that? How do you get to know that?
Well, you only know by response. And I think now in this day and age, it's a lot easier to get that response. It was always difficult to get that response in the old days. But I used to use the barometer of the people that I worked with who, didn't really like new young people coming into the industry. But when they would come up to me in the office and go, "You did a great job. I thought that was really interesting. I've never seen that before." Or other journalists at other outlets going, "I heard you do that the other day. I thought it was really interesting." You begin to get
the barometer was starting to shake.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you're like, okay, well that became my thing. How do I make people who don't care about what I'm doing interested? So I did a couple more years there, and then I moved from South Wales to East Anglia, and I worked my way up in radio there. And then the opportunity came up for me to go back to the station where I started my career and become the news editor there. So I did go back, did about 18 months, 2 years there. And then I had the opportunity to move to London. So I seized that with great opportunity. And it was at that point where I kind of reached that point. I did the news for Virgin Radio and several other national brands. And that's where I got to the point where, okay, what do I do now? So the world was my oyster. So I went to work at Capital FM for a couple of years in London. I worked on the breakfast show there. I was the morning news editor. And then I moved to some other radio stations and back.
Did you ever do anything with LBC?
I did occasionally. I mean, I worked for a radio group that I either in some shape or form or went to and came back from. and and eventually we all became one massive group. So I did some stuff on LBC. I
Oh.
still occasionally appear on there from LA. And so
I really love that station. I could listen to it for hours. It's
it's fantastic, and even if you
yeah.
don't agree with sort of their political or editorial positioning, the dialogue is really interesting. And
There's always someone that does disagree or someone that doesn't agree, and I love the fact that it's just a great station, and it just keeps getting better and better. I don't know why they put that lady on there for a while. What's the lady called?
oh, Hartley Brewer.
No, the very opinionated lady from Britain who writes for the Daily Mail. I
Oh,
can't think of her name.
Katie
Yeah,
Hopkins.
Hopkins. That's it. That was a mistake.
All about the ratings. All about the ratings.
Sorry, I'm
Um,
massively digressing. I just love LBC, but
no, it's
carry
fine.
on.
But yeah, so I worked at Capital for a number of years, and then that was around the
Mm,
early 2000s. And I realized that the industry was really changing at that point, and the internet was obviously established, but it was really becoming something different in the terms of publishing. I saw a lot of newspapers really exploring that. So I left Capital FM and I went to work at The Sun, at thesun.co.uk, which at the time was the highest rated news site in the world. It was absolutely top of the tree. And so I
mm,
went there, and it was around the same time as podcasting was starting to become popular in the US, and it was very new in the UK. So I worked with The Sun to create their first iteration of the Bazaar podcast. I helped them develop a lot of their video content. And then I realized again, I was like, there are lots of disciplines in this industry that I've never explored before. So I did about a year at The Sun, and then I went to work for a news agency, which was run by a guy called Rick Sky, Bang Showbiz. And Rick was one of the greatest tabloid reporters of all time in the UK. So I went and worked with him for a while. I learned about how news wires worked about delivering to clients and client expectations. So I did that, and then I kind of went and worked for a couple of other businesses within various sectors, and then the opportunity came to go to Heart as the showbiz editor, where I had the opportunity, and I saw that radio was really growing and evolving and becoming something new, and they had an online component, but they didn't really connect in any way. And I felt that, bearing in mind how, from my experience, where the industry was going, there were a lot of opportunities for content and a lot of opportunities for revenue. So the online could feed radio, radio could feed online. It was very separate at one point, then it became more circular. We saw
mm.
sales teams starting to sell on air and online campaigns. We started to work together to utilize how we could effectively monetize everything that we do. So I worked there for a while. Gradually, Heart got swallowed up by another company and Global Radio, and it became from 3 stations that I was the editor for to 32 stations around the UK.
Wow.
Yeah, that grew. We ended up doing the largest radio promotion of all time at that time in the UK for Mamma Mia, where we did weeks of screenings before national release. At the Odeon in Leicester Square, we did intros from cast. We did jocks from the station. I hosted a couple of the screenings, and we did a live OB breakfast from
Wow.
Laganisi in Greece, where we had the cast of Mamma Mia. And then, for the first time, we televised the premiere of Mamma Mia in Odeon cinemas across the UK. No one had done that before, but I like to kind of look at things and I go, okay, we can replicate, we can take things forward, but what is the cherry on the top of the cake that's really going to make this different, that's going to stand out? Again, people who would never go and see Mamma Mia, how do we get their attention? So it's all about really having that little extra spark. So I did Heart for a while. I left there. I got made redundant, unfortunately. I then moved into the video sector, and that's where I started my life as on the side of production. I worked for a production company that dealt with all the major studios, Warner, Disney, Sony. We started creating content, red carpet content for them, bespoke programming. I produced a number of things for US outlets that needed somebody in London. And that was where I gradually moved into TV. A couple of years later, I launched a TV show on Channel 5 called Inside Hollywood, which was a daily movie show. That was very successful. I had a week to put that together. They'd already got the commission, and it was a case of you start on the Monday, we go to air the following Monday. So I had a week to basically create rough edits of the show and get it signed off for us to go live the following Monday. And I realized then that really I actually thrive when I have a very short or tight deadline to make something happen. I had that in news, and this was completely different. So many more elements. It was telling stories, but using different mediums. So I could do it without pictures, I could do it with pictures. And then I gradually evolved, and I found myself eventually at London Live and launched that. And that was a very interesting experience. It was a case of, we didn't have a lot of resources, we didn't have a lot of money, but we still had to launch this TV channel. And we, with London Live and London Go, the entertainment show that I did in the evening, we managed to really create a solid audience there for that launch. And at that point, it was actually my wife and I were thinking about relocating. And so I'd started my move already. I'd started making connections here in the US, looking at what it would take to successfully move over here. And then I did London Live for a year, left that. Then we immigrated over here at the end of 2015. And one thing I was not prepared about the fact that moving to the US is that it didn't matter what I had done in the UK in the previous 20 years. They didn't know pretty much any of the places that I had worked, and they fundamentally didn't believe that I had achieved what I'd achieved because they weren't aware of any of the places that I'd worked. So I very quickly found myself in, even though I'd made connections over here, I very quickly found myself in the position that I had to start again. I really had to start from scratch here. And what I found very quickly was people were genuinely surprised that what I said I could do and what was on my resume was true.
Why was that? Why was there so much doubt that you hadn't been credible? Why couldn't you just walk in and go,
Well,
"This is me"?
to them, I mean, it's funny. My wife was working with John Lewis, and she was one of the people that created the click and collect model for shopping. So she was part of that team that created that. John Lewis, a huge retailer in the UK, she would come over here and she would be looking at, moving into e-commerce over here.
Mm.
And a lot of Americans had no idea what John Lewis was. You could talk about annual revenue. You could talk about how many millions or billions it made every year. But because they didn't know what John Lewis was, they were like, okay, how do I know that's true?
Oh,
So
okay.
really, it was very interesting. And having spoken to a lot of people who've moved over
If you
here,
said you'd done something for Asda or Walmart, maybe that might have
see,
propelled you forwards quicker.
yeah, literally the only thing that they looked at my resume and saw that was any good was BBC,
Well,
because
the
it's an
BBC speaks
international
for
brand.
itself, yeah.
Exactly. And I could have
Mm.
been a T-boy at the BBC, but the fact that it said BBC, people were like, well, clearly you're not an idiot. So,
Yeah.
a lot of people who do make the move over here, they aren't ready for the fact that in many cases you do have to start
Was
again.
you ready for it, or was it a surprise to you?
I kind of was ready for it. And here's why.
Mm.
I was in a position where I had fundamentally achieved everything that I wanted to and thought I could achieve in the UK, because the attitudes in the UK are slightly different, where you stay in your lane, you do what you do. You are a manager, you are a business person, you are a lawyer, you are a doctor. You do that. If you're a certain type of a journalist, you stick to that kind of journalism. You don't really move out of that lane. So I was seen
Mm.
predominantly as entertainment, and I didn't do a lot of sort of deeper, more cerebral stuff. It was quite surface and light-hearted. And so when I was trying to say I'd like to make documentaries, people were like, well, that's lovely, but stick to the red carpet. So
Mm.
what I found here was the fact that I effectively had to reinvent myself and decide, what do I actually want? Where do my strengths lie?
How did you do that? Because that's not an easy thing to do.
You've got to get really honest with yourself, and you've got to wonder
Mm.
why you're doing it, because it's actually quite, wages and salaries over here are higher than they are in the UK, but the cost of living is a lot higher. And I think people think
Yeah.
that there is that old classic model of, you move to America, the streets are paved with gold, you move to Hollywood, you're suddenly living in a huge house, everything's great, you have lots of famous friends, and you've got money coming out of your ears. It's really not that case, and especially as the industry is going now.
So I would never have thought it was like that, but I think that's because maybe I don't live in cloud cuckoo land. I don't know. I think I understand how difficult it is to break into any market, but I don't think I'm probably the majority opinion on that.
No, I think you are the exception to the rule, but I also think you obviously see the world in a very, not
Mm.
necessarily through rose-tinted glasses, but a lot of people also
Yeah.
assume, and I know a lot of legal people listen to this show. A lot of people assume that you can just up sticks and move to America.
Oh, they do. The amount of people that try it and then fail, or it just doesn't go right. But it sounds like a really interesting process to go through that kind of reinvention. Was it quite refreshing in a way to kind of think, well, who is it I want to become over here, and maybe I
Yeah.
can adjust that somewhat from, what I'd built up in the UK. To be able to almost have a blank canvas and start again must have been quite refreshing.
Well, it was, and also obviously a lot of people. Nobody likes to fail. I've had failures in my
No.
career. I mean, London Live, as proud as I am of that result, was has not turned out to be a great success. And we really fought against the odds, and it was an uphill struggle all the way. But we really achieved some great stuff there. And a lot of people are afraid to fail, and so when they realize that it's hard work, they will just go back to the UK, and that's totally fine. There's nothing wrong with that. That's entirely understandable. But you really have to look at it and go, okay, the way that I approached it was, if I fail in the UK, everybody that I've worked with would see that I have failed or my career has ended. I didn't want to do
Mm.
that. But I thought, if
So
I
it was like
can
the point of
take
no return anyway.
exactly. And people did ask at the time. They
Mm.
were like, my wife was very successful in what she was doing, and I was being very successful in what I was doing. And they're like, well, aren't you worried about leaving your career behind, you starting again? And actually, it was the very opposite of that, because I felt that if I came over here and it did all fall apart, and I ended up having to get a regular job, which there was nothing wrong with doing that, then I could do that out of the sight of people going, oh, isn't it a shame? He was once really good at what he did, and now he's doing whatever. I could do that over here and just get on with that. But also, if I did turn out to nail it here, then I could really have some opportunity. And
Mm.
attitudes, I think, are attitudes towards collaboration and development and growth and curiosity. While there is a lot of BS in LA, and there's a lot of people who will very happily blow smoke up your ass until the cows come home, they'll make you feel like you're the best thing ever. If you're realistic and you keep your head above water, and you keep a very level head about it, I think you can actually do very well here. But it is accepting that the fact that you do have to start again, and that isn't easy for a lot of people.
You've got to have a lot of, I guess, kind of energy and pace. You've already kind of built yourself up to what you are, which wasn't easy. But then to start again and have to, go through the whole process from the beginning with no one recognizing anything, that's almost like becoming a trainee again in some ways, isn't it?
Oh, in so many ways. I mean, certainly for the first six
Mm.
months, 9 months, even 12 months here in the US, I had to effectively do jobs that were way below my ability level. But that was the only way where I could get people to see me doing what I needed to do, where they're going like,
But it got you in the door talking to the right people.
absolutely. And that's
Yes,
the thing.
it's
Once you get
interesting.
that face to face thing, well, people do realize, and that's the hardest part, especially here in LA, is getting
Because
that.
but you let your ego not get the better of you, which is maybe where a lot of people go wrong. You kind of went, "Okay, I'm prepared to take that, in order to see the bigger picture." But I guess that's where a lot of people go wrong, is it?
It is. I mean, it is fundamentally, that's a big part of it, but also assuming that you can just, if you're successful in place A, you can be successful in place B. It's, the conditions are not the same. There are so many different factors here. I mean, even down to, like I say, going back to the issue with visas is, I know of people, journalists who come over here and they will stay here on an I visa. Now, an I visa doesn't allow you residency. But if you stay here long enough, you have to do things like you have to pay US taxes. And people don't realize that. And if you're in LA, you have to register as a business if you're operating as a business in LA. So some people think they
Mm.
can circumvent the system by not getting a green card or a certain type of visa by kind of skirting around, and people get caught out.
Yeah, I'm sure the IRS have their fishing nets laid down in Los Angeles. I'm sure.
Oh, they do.
I'm sure that's one of the states they look more favourably on the tax collection.
Oh, absolutely. And the IRS are tenacious, and they will find you,
Mm.
whether it's, next year, the year after, 25 years down the road, and they will
Yeah.
want their money. People don't realize that you can't necessarily just turn up with any visa and get any job here. So,
Mm.
not all companies will employ people who have I visas. Not all people will. You can't come over
Ah.
on one particular visa and then swap jobs and necessarily just go
Mm.
and do a separate career, because your visa won't allow that. So it really is about, and it's a complicated process with the paperwork, but really, and it's not cheap to hire a lawyer to do it entirely legally, but it is worth doing because you don't want to get it wrong. That will instantly
Yeah.
take
Yeah.
everything from under your feet, and whatever you either have built or are building will be taken away from you.
I think there's lots of interesting lessons in what you're saying. I think one is prepare. And also, do your due diligence and your research. You really got to, I think maybe that's why you've been successful out there, because you kind of knew what to expect. You did your proper due diligence before you went out there. You knew what you were going to have to do, and you came up with a plan. And, all of those things, I guess, are a real testament to, why you've gone out there and been successful.
I think part of the success is the fact that I would never describe myself as someone who is a naysayer, but I am also aware that even the best laid plans
Mm.
can go wrong. So I like to have a safety net. I like to have a plan B. I like to look at what are the options available? Which way could this go? If it goes any of these ways, how do we pull it back? What do we do? What's the resolution? What's the end result on that?
But I'm guessing you don't spend too much time focusing on plan B. That's just there. What you're really looking at is plan A.
And 100%, 100%. But what I often
Mm.
find is the plan A that I might have isn't necessarily where I'll end up. I mean, a great example is with the documentary that I've been developing for a number of years. And when I've tried to get that off the ground so many times, and it's fallen apart so many times, sometimes because partnerships haven't worked out, or sometimes because, especially last year with coronavirus, people who were going to fund it decided they didn't want to fund it. There
Mm.
was somebody who was very interested in their documentary company getting involved, and then they decided to run for president. So that meant that everything they were creating was shelved or scrapped, or they didn't take
Yeah.
any more projects on. So it's kind of like, well, great, but how do I keep the wheels turning on this? So I had wanted to do this documentary, but because, and this is not name droppy, but I I had connected with a very well known actress in the UK while I was doing one of my interviews. I used to do a lot of on camera stuff, and when I came over here, I bumped into her at another event that I was doing. She was delighted to see me, and she was very positive and like, oh, I'm really pleased you're in LA. Oh, it's great to see you here. And we got into a conversation. She was like, what are you doing? What do you want to do? And I mentioned that I had a couple of ideas that I wanted to develop as feature content. And she
Mm.
said, you should absolutely do that. You should look at doing documentaries. And I said, well, actually, it is a documentary. So because of this actress saying,
Are we
you
allowed
really
to
should
ask
do
who
this,
this is,
it's,
or I'm?
it's yeah, it's Laura Dern.
Ah.
And so because Laura was very much like, I think you would do a very good job with this. I think you should
Yeah.
explore it. I decided that, you know what? I mean, Laura Dern has been in the industry for a number of years and has family in the industry, so she would know. And
Mm.
I have no value to Laura Dern. I'm not important. I don't have any power in the industry. She has nothing to gain from suggesting that I explore this. But I have everything
Mm.
to gain by believing that she may be right and maybe I should explore it. It wouldn't cost me anything, just time and effort, but the
But that's
gain.
a stamp of endorsement, and I like that. That's a really nice story.
Yeah, and it's I
Mm.
continue, and whether I saw her about a year ago, or at the Critics' Choice Awards together, and I will always. She probably doesn't even remember the conversation, but it is
Oh,
not.
I'm sure she probably remembers it more than you are thinking in your mind.
But I will always
Yeah.
say that, it was because of Laura Dern that I decided, well, maybe I will pursue making
Mm.
this documentary. And now, 5 years later, it is looking like it will become a reality.
What a lovely story. I'd like to ask you a question, sort of on behalf of people listening. And I was
Sure.
thinking to myself throughout this conversation, what is it I can actually ask you? And rather than just saying, how do you get into media, which I think would be, the typical question, what you've built is brand Simon Thompson. And I keep saying to people from all different backgrounds and levels, you've got to build a brand. It doesn't matter what you do, you've got to build your own brand, because you've got to just be more than if you're just someone that services work and you're not a brand, that's you're never going to reap the full rewards. I guess my question to you is, what advice would you give to someone who's maybe got a bit of a brand or wants to really develop their self brand? And I think that's probably a good advice question to ask you.
The first thing I would say is whatever you believe, again, whichever side of the political spectrum you're on, whatever the thing is, believe
Mm.
in what you're saying and be able to stand it up. Be accountable for what you are putting on the table. Don't say or do something because you think you should be saying it or doing it, or because someone else wants you to do it.
Mm.
Be authentic, be accountable, and own it. And that means own it from start to finish, whether it is a success or a failure. I was
Mm.
when I worked with Quibi last year. It was a very expensive venture. It was a platform here in the US that ended up lasting less than, I think it was 9 months. It came to a close at the end of November. We launched in April, and that is perhaps one of, not because of my work, because the work that I was working on with a very great team. In fact, another British producer was my co-producer on the project. The platform was a failure. Our product was a success. But the collapse of Quibi actually has had more people in the industry knocking on my door, wanting to have conversations with me
Ah.
because they want to know what went right, what went wrong, what can we learn from it, and how can we avoid making the same
See,
mistakes.
such an interesting. That's even interesting in itself, and I think that's where sometimes views differ between the UK and the US. The fact that people want to talk to you about the failures of that as well as the successes, that in itself is testament to you. They really value you and they want to understand why you weren't successful in that. It's just the way of looking at it. It's a very different way of looking at something. Do you think?
Well, absolutely. I mean, it's part of this self-preservation, which I think is a key part of the American dream. I mean,
Yeah.
if you look at American business and American history, every success has probably been, started out as so many failures, the mistakes of others. And really, people want to
Mm.
America, despite even the last couple of years, it remains a very progressive society, whether that is technologically, when it comes to business or anything else. People really want to be, there is a desperate thing for America and Americans to be number one. They want to be out in front. And one of the fastest ways to do that
I
is,
love that about America as well.
it's one of the
I
reasons I
love
wanted to
that.
be
Yeah.
here, and but a
Mm,
key part of that is learning how not to make the same mistakes again. And
mm,
so you can genuinely, if you have a team, if whether you're, again, legal side or business side, how do we not make the same in court? How do we not make the same mistakes with an argument in business? How do we not make the same mistake with a supplier?
mm,
What didn't work for someone else that we can look at, and we can use that. We can even actually turn that failure into a success by flipping it, by completely flipping it and going, look at it another way. And it's really important, and it will cost you, as a business person, nothing to learn from that person's mistake. But you know what? Your solution might also not work out, but there's going to be another company on the other side of the table who are going to look at your mistakes and they're going to learn from that. So it really is a key part of building, I think, the most effective business model. But really, going back to accountability, owning that is really, really important. I initially in my career, I didn't like talking about things that didn't work out, whether that was professional relationships, whether it was something I did within my professional life. I just didn't like it. And I found the more I've become an open book,
mm,
means that not only am I more able to understand my processes and my decisions and why I do things and what the end game is, but it also means
mm,
that nobody can sling mud at you if you're transparent and you wear it externally. Because nobody can go,
mm.
"Well, you don't like to talk about your failures." I'm like, do you know what? I've made a lot of mistakes in my career, but all those mistakes have led me to where I am now as much as the successes that I've had. And I think it's not to be all
Mm.
LA and New Worldy, but it's something of an epiphany.
Do you know what? I find you so interesting, and I could let you continue to talk for the next hour because I think you make not just really good listens in the industry that you're in, but I think you make some very valid points. That's why I've been so successful in my respective industries because I've learned how to learn from these problems. And once I've had a problem once, I don't want the same problem a second
Mm.
time. And I think sometimes the skill to do that is overlooked because that is a skill in itself.
Well, one thing also that amazed me the very first
Mm,
time I was on a backlot here, because part of what I do, I get to go to screenings and meetings and stuff on
yeah.
studios around LA, which is, I still, after 5 years, cannot not get exceptionally excited about being on a backlot and just being able to walk around. And I
While
started
the sun is beaming down on you and you're probably drinking a very
sweat,
refreshing drink as
sweating,
well.
sweating, incredibly.
I'm so not jealous right now, but carry on with the story.
But I basically, I was walking around, and when I moved to LA, I thought I had to dress a certain way. And again, it's about fitting other people's
Mm,
ideals and other people's models. And I began to walk around, and I turned up one day, and I'm usually wearing, Converse Chucks, I'm wearing jeans, I'm wearing a shirt, and I'm wearing a baseball cap. That's usually my that's my getup. And
American wardrobe.
American wardrobe. And
Hmm.
as soon as I started walking around the movie sets dressed like that with a coffee, and I was like maybe making a phone call, people I did not know were going, "Oh, hey, how you're doing?" And I suddenly realized that, and I noticed with a lot of my friends who are far more successful than I am in the industry, but they all dress normally. They don't dress like they've got $1 million. Now, that's not to say you should go out there looking all scruffy, but
It's so weird though, because
do
that's what I
your
dress like.
well, it's like do your
Mm.
representation of yourself, because your work
Hmm.
speaks for itself. And I very lucky to have some, very high level friends, studio executives, well known
Mm.
directors, screenwriters, and whenever we get together for drinks or whatever, we're all wearing exactly the same thing. And that's what they wear to their meetings. I've had meetings for documentaries and shows, and everybody's wearing the same thing. The CEOs will be wearing suits, and there will be suits in any company. But it's very much and I actually find a lot of people find it quite disarming, and they focus
Mm.
more on what you're saying and what you're talking about than they are about the fact that you're wearing jeans and a shirt. I find I'm more comfortable presenting in
Oh,
that
I am.
situation.
I'd never wear a suit, even though I work in legal. Even that I used to go to meetings years ago dressing in a suit because I thought that's what I had to wear. Now I'm just like, I'm not going to wear what I don't want to wear.
Yeah.
I feel that things are more important that these days than necessarily what you wear. But I think that you've just made a really valid example about kind of making yourself fall into the backdrop nicely.
Yeah, and it's about sometimes you can try so hard to belong that you really look like you don't belong.
You make another valid point. You make many of them, but I agree with you. If you try to blend in, then you end up people just don't end up hearing you. You've got to stand out and have a voice. So I
Yeah.
think that's
And
another really good listen.
that's about authenticity. It's about
Mm.
accountability. It's nobody can say that you're pretending to be something you're not. If you're pretending to be exactly who you are, it's about
Yeah,
that authenticity.
yeah, I totally agree, and I think you've made some really, really valuable listens, and through telling your anecdotes, it's made it really kind of come to life for me. So I'm sure it has so many people listening to this. Simon, if people want to find out more about you or connect with you, where can they go?
Well, you can find me on social media at Showbiz Simon on Instagram and Twitter. I'm on LinkedIn. By the way, I must apologize for my Instagram and Twitter handle, because I was a very early adopter of Twitter.
You're trying to get away from the showbiz, Simon. You
Yeah,
need to get a new
this is
Twitter handle,
thing, but
a
I'm
documentary,
verified.
Simon.
I'm verified now, and so I can't change it without losing my verified status. And I'm like, oh my god, I sound like I'm something out of the broom cupboard in the 1990s. Some
I like showbiz, Simon. I definitely remember that tomorrow when I wake up. It's at least you've got what you don't want is to change it and then come back and it should be showbiz Simon 16824. That's
exactly.
not going to have the right ring to it.
So I'm at Showbiz Simon on Instagram and Twitter. I am obviously
Mm.
Simon Thompson on LinkedIn, and I would love to chat and talk to people. I always encourage a dialogue. And also I have a website, thisissimonThompson.com, which I'm currently updating at the moment because obviously my career is changing. It's going through another phase.
Having a new gloss put on the
I'm
surface.
basically
I
giving myself
love
a
that.
lick of paint, and so please do reach out that way. I'm always interested to hear from people.
Mm.
It's funny. I became a member of the Television Academy, which is basically like the Oscars for TV here, and I'm taking part in a lot of Q&As and workshops, and the ones that I'm taking part in are the ones that are nothing to do with what I do in my day to day.
But that's where you're going to add value. That's
Because
where you're going to learn the lessons.
that's what I'm going to do. I want to
Yeah.
understand what is outside of my
Mm.
comfort zone, what is outside of my day to day, because I know that. What I don't know is the other side. So that's part of the growth.
There we go. Simon, thank you for coming on this episode. It's been lovely.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much.
That was Simon Thompson from Los Angeles here on the Career Success Podcast. I'm Jason Connolly. Until next time, goodbye.